Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? This show is about hearing stories from exceptional people that can help jumpstart and inspire you to create the life you want. One filled with wealth, wisdom, meaning, and purpose. And that starts with surrounding yourself with the right people. And the people I'm interviewing, I believe you'd want to spend a day with in a canoe. I'm your host, Nathan Mercereau. Well, I'm happy to have Vinay Tolia join me, an accomplished entrepreneur and executive. And Vinay, you and I met each other serendipitously through a number of connections, only to discover that you pretty much grew up about a mile or two from our home in Michigan. So welcome to Day in the Canoe, and love to hear your story. So how did you move from growing up in Michigan to where you are now? What are some of the major milestones?
Thanks for having me. First of all, Nathan, it's great to chat with you. That was very fortuitous that that our paths crossed, and that you live just a couple miles from where I grew up, and that you are a Canadian that is now living in the U.S. I was actually in Canada when we first met and moved back to the U.S. I've had a really kind of meandering path. I grew up in suburban Detroit, and then my parents came from India. They're both physicians. They came in the mid 70s. I have an identical twin brother. It's just the two of us. And after college, I worked I was in engineering college, and then I worked on Wall Street in New York. And my brother and I started a business together, and it was a hedge fund, and then got involved in cannabis when we were in Chicago running the fund, and they changed the laws to allow for medicinal cannabis in Illinois. I didn't know anything about cannabis, but I got fascinated in the space, started investing in some companies, and one thing led to another, and we invested in a Canadian company, which I moved up to Toronto in 2018 to become the CEO, and we went public on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and it's still public. It's called Flower with no E, FLOWR. And then I did that until earlier this year, 2021, and then moved to Miami. So I'm living in the warmth for once in my life. But I guess, my path is just very random, and it's just kind of been this thing where I've just followed where I've been interested in, and it's never served me wrong. It hasn't made a whole lot of sense at times, but it's always seemed to work out.
Some people talk about setting a goal and visualizing your future and kind of be driven and just head down to get to that goal line. But a lot of times life kind of shows up and opportunities show up, and you got to decide and pivot. What advice would you give to people that are maybe at that crossroads? Do I set this, goal and target, and this is how my life has to be, or do I just kind of wait and see what happens and have an open mind?
So it's a great question. It's actually something I won't say struggled with, but I've thought a lot about, because one of the things that I've learned over the years is I would become so fixated on a specific goal that I've found myself in that trap of I won't be happy unless I get this, or until this, and you're setting yourself up to be miserable, and you're putting this constraint on your life, whereby you're basically telling yourself that unless I meet XYZ criteria, I won't be happy, which is just a recipe to be miserable. And then lo and behold, when you meet that, you're still not happy. Something else will come along. So I guess to answer your question, what I found is, and just to further elaborate, is I have found that when I had a goal, I was so scared of not hitting it that in fact I took maybe a more conservative approach than I should have, because I was so scared of what would happen if I didn't reach this? What if happened if I quote unquote failed? And I would kind of give people, or I do give people, the advice of it's okay to have it. I think it's healthy to have a goal, but it's just it's a guide. It's not an end all be all. And that if you don't reach it, or you find another path, or you you try something new and it doesn't work, but you learn something in the process, like that in itself is fulfilling. So I guess I do like to have, I do like to visualize, hey, well, ideally where what would my life be like in 5 years, 10 years, and all that. But I keep in mind that it's just life always has a way of twisting and turning, and nothing's ever a straight line. So that if you don't get there, or at least you don't get there in the way you thought you're going to get there, it's okay, and that's all. And that shouldn't be viewed as a failure. That's, that's learning, and that's life.
There's so many ways that we've been conditioned and have expectations either set by ourselves about what we should be, how we should behave, what the success looks like. Maybe family has influenced that, maybe our peer group, maybe, the circles we hang out with. So how does someone cross the bridge from saying, no, I don't want to be defined by other people's expectations, so that I always have this sense of kind of work or, grind, but I want to be fulfilled? Like, how have you navigated that?
That's the ultimate question, right? Isn't that there? I've seen this somewhere where people are asked, like, kind of on their deathbed, what's their biggest regret, and like more often than not, their biggest regret is something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, but like, I wish I lived the life that I wanted to lead instead of the life that I felt other people wanted me to lead. Um, that's something that I still to this day am trying to figure out for myself. I I think right now is a really interesting time for me, because it's the first time, and it's really the first time since college, that I haven't had a full time kind of 9 to 5 job to go to, and I'm trying to figure that out myself. Um, I think the way I'll share how I deal with it. I don't know if it will work for everyone, but um, I think that journey, it's really one, and this might sound a little cliche, but I think it's really one where it's that inward journey. It's that really spending time being comfortable, thinking about what it is that makes you tick, what it is that brings you joy, or again, I'll say what it is brings me joy and meaning, and that even that varies from week to week and month to month. So it's not like this is a hard and fast rule that always works for me. But I found that by spending time kind of alone with my thoughts, trying to be intentional about my own how I spend my own time, that it hasn't solved all my problems, but it's led me down a path where if I look back at how I've spent the last 3 months, 6 months, a year, um, I have less regret. I don't view. I guess it's not. It's more about like kind of minimizing regret for me than it is about figuring out the key to solving all of life's issues.
Now, that's an excellent perspective, and I don't think there is one button that you push and you've crossed the bridge, you've arrived. I mean, that in fact would be the very essence of what you're trying to get away from, which is to have this goal line that you cross. But I'm hearing you talk about self-awareness and self-reflection, and maybe listening to the inner voice instead of the outside voices that may be an influence. And I know that that's what a lot of us deal with, expectations, and those that we put on ourselves, those that others place on us, but allowing us to become the real person and grow and be fulfilled, I think is everyone's objective. And sometimes it just takes us a while to realize the importance of that. And we don't want it to be on the deathbed. We want it to be now. And I think you're doing a great job of just facing the challenge, because it is a challenge. And, but I think just having the awareness of the issues is so important. I want to pivot over to your career, because I think it's a really interesting one that a lot of people have an interest in, which is the cannabis industry. So, what, just in kind of a short form, unpack the cannabis industry for our listeners? Like, what is happening in the industry that makes it so appealing from a business standpoint, from a consumer standpoint?
So it's a really fascinating space. It's an incredibly difficult space, but it's fascinating from the point of view of this is what we're seeing is kind of Prohibition 2.0, right? This is an industry where we know the demand exists. It is massive. This is not some new technology where we have to think about, hey, how big is this market? We know the market is enormous. It's a product that's been around for thousands of years. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. I won't get into the politics and all that stuff, which is, you could spend hours talking about that, and it's really fascinating. If anyone's interested, I would suggest you Google, cannabis prohibition in the United States and how it came about, because it's not at all what I thought about how it came about when I first got involved in the space. But the business is fascinating because it in the United States. I'll specifically talk about the United States, and then I'll talk a little bit about abroad. But in the United States, it is a state-by-state issue. So each state is kind of its own regulatory animal. So they have their own. There's no interstate commerce, so you can't grow in one state and sell in another. And at least right now, the way the laws are set up, and all the regulations and rules are different from state to state. So it's like 50 separate countries when you're talking about cannabis. But we're in an age where it's medically or recreationally available to the vast majority of Americans now. So and it's becoming this issue where if you look at national polling, I think it's almost at 70% of the country is in favor of recreational adult use cannabis. I think we're kind of having this moment where people are realizing that it's much better to regulate it and tax it than versus the approach we've had over the last 80 years, the war on drugs approach. And from a business point of view, we're at this cusp of we're taking this massive market from the illicit market to the legal market, and we're figuring out the rules and regulations as we go along. And so what's super exciting is in the United States, you're having this kind of awakening, I would say, of cannabis users, and you're seeing a lot of young people now who want to drink less. And the alcohol's always kind of been the drug of choice for the population because it's been legal, but a lot of people are seeing that there's impacts around society and one's own health that cannabis can really. There were impacts around society and one's own health that maybe aren't the most beneficial for or are actually very detrimental for alcohol. That you don't have that with cannabis. So you're having a lot of young people, and even I smoked a joint with my dad a month ago. I never thought I'd say that, but where a lot of people are trying this product and realizing that it does have a lot of benefits. So from I know there's a long-winded way of saying this, but to answer your question about what's so exciting about it from the investment point of view, when you think about allocating capital, which is what I've done for years, there is a massive industry. This is going to be in the United States $50 to $100 billion a year annual industry, and it's federally illegal right now. So there has not been a ton of capital go into chasing that opportunity. So what we've done is created a fund to invest in U.S. cannabis companies. So that's what we're excited about right now. What I was doing before this was working at a company where we had facilities in Canada, which is fully federally recreationally legal. So you can treat it like a normal business, which you can't do in the US. And we also had facilities in Australia and Europe. So while those countries are kind of ahead of us in the US as far as given that it's federally legal, it's just a much smaller market. Canada is a much smaller market, and the EU is still very, very small, and it's not recreational legal. It's just really medicinally legal in a handful of countries. So the exciting part from an investment point of view, in my opinion, is the US. That's why I'm focused on it. And if you just wanted a bullet point, you have call it a $50 to $100 billion industry where there's only been, a few $1 billion of capital go into. And so there's going to be much more capital required for the US to kind of reach a state where we can satiate the demand for the entire population if and when it goes federally legal. And there's just so many ancillary products and services that are going to go alongside this that it's just a really exciting time to be in business and to be an investor in the space.
So it sounds like this could be a multi-decade runway from an investment perspective.
If you think about industries where there's secular growth, and not to say there's not going to be fits and starts, but where there's secular growth for, you said, a decade plus, there's not many like cannabis, where I think this year 2021 the retail sales in the US will be right around $20 billion. So if you think about going from 20 to 100 in 15 years, you figure out that growth rate, and there's not many industries where you can say you're going to be growing at a 20% CAGR for a decade, and especially at this size of the industry, and that's what makes cannabis so exciting.
So as you think about the future, and this will be my last question, what do you dream about? What are the things that just really inspire you and energize you?
When I look towards the future, obviously, okay, I'll kind of split this up. So from the opportunity set that's in front of me right now, cannabis is super exciting, and so it's been a rocky ride, but I am a firm believer that in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, like, this cannabis market is going to be much, much larger, and we're going to look back at this and say, man, this was crazy that these things were that these opportunities were available when they were. So I'm excited about that, and about how the future kind of unfolds for cannabis. But personally, for me, I'm just super excited to be working with people I want to work with, and that's kind of for my own professional fulfillment. I mean, the fact that I get to hang out with people like you, Nathan, and the partners I have now, like, just really kind of high integrity, intellectually curious people. That's just very, very exciting and fulfilling to me, and it's exciting to me that I have no idea what the future holds, but like, I know that if I'm in this with the people I want to be in it with, it'll be okay, and we'll have, even if things don't work out, we'll have fun and we'll learn along the way, and there are always opportunities. There are always ways. I mean, I've seen this in my own career and life where I've pivoted so many times, and it's always worked out. And the common thread of when it's worked out is that I've been around people that I want to be around. And so, like, that's what excites me. Like, just optimizing life for being around the people you want to be around, and just making the journey as enjoyable as possible. That's kind of what's always worked and what's always energized me.
Well, that's a great way to wrap up our conversation, because that's what Day in the Canoe is all about. And it's being in a canoe and in conversation with people that are interesting, that are of integrity. And that's what life is about. So I really am glad that our paths cross, and want to wish you all the best for an exciting future that's ahead.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you here.
Thank you for listening and tuning in to Day in a Canoe. We are thrilled to have you as part of our community. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with your friends and loved ones. You can always get more information at dayinacanoe.com. We'll see you next time.